Good morning, everyone. I'm Architecture Assistant Professor at Vedavyasa College of Architecture. Today, I'll be discussing about sustainable architecture as a part of the ongoing VISTA lecture series produced by Vedavyasa College of Architecture. So, the concept of sustainability as a whole, actually, or the sustainable architecture as it is, actually refers to the kind of architectural practice that actually seeks to minimize the environmental impact of buildings by efficiently moderating the use of materials which for the building, which would include like the building material for the building as it is, or the building materials that are used for the supporting infrastructure, such as like healthcare facilities nearby, or building a road to access the building that is being built. It could be all those materials that are being used for a building to be functional, and the energy used that which can be divided into subparts, that is like the energy that is being used for the construction of the building, which would actually going further beyond that, which it would also would include the kind of energy used for procuring each of the building materials, the energy that is being caused for bringing all these building materials onto the site, all these factors, and even the construction, the energy used while the construction is happening, as well as like the energy that is being used for the functional running of the building, that is like the operational energy cost for the building, and even the development space that is being used for the construction, which would include the where the building is actually located, and the area which is being used for developing other supporting infrastructure as well, and even the ecosystem which where the building is actually located at. So the efficient, if we, like the moderating the use of all these resources and making the best out of it is what the concept of sustainable architecture refers to in a broad sense. So the thought of sustainability as it is wasn't really thought of, not like not like thought of in a day or two, or people actually started thinking about this concept in like the last just people started thinking about this concept only in the last 30 or 40 years. So a few factors, socio-economical and other factors, actually led people to think about this concept, such as like the whole industrial revolution actually goes for a lot of like pollution and pollution related issues, things such as like sick building syndrome or other health concern, pollution causing for like skin diseases or like respiratory diseases and things like that, actually led people to think about the factor, like if this is not the right way of living, and we should actually think about our environment as it is, and we should actually do our developments, or we should actually align our way of living in such a way that we actually nourish our surrounding environment, and we actually think about the future generation when we are actually by making a very single decision. So this was like the initial uh, ideas which actually led to the thing, like the thought of sustainable architecture or sustainable living as it is. Even like the use of like the fossil fuel, the non-renewable resources for like the day-to-day energy consumption, and the realization about the fact that all these resources would become extinct in the like in the adjacent future, actually thought made people think about alternative energy resources, such as like the use of electric cars or using solar panels in your houses, or going for more sustainable materials for construction, sustainable material construction of building or infrastructure assets. So all these factors actually contributed to the thought of a sustainable living, like how to align our life such a way that we actually resonate with the surrounding nature and actually nourish the surrounding nature. So a few other socio-cultural changes actually cause for these ideas, as in like the influence of Euro-American culture. So people living in a civilization, this kind of civilization model, and people moving the like rapid urbanization, or people actually trying to live like these people who are like the Euro-American people, or like trying to orient their like working hours, their way of clothing, their way of like consuming food, all these things actually led like the general public to be more aware, to be more concerned about the surrounding environment. So all these things actually doesn't really nourish the surrounding environment as it is. So like the over exhaustion of like energy sources, relying on like private vehicles more than usual. All these things actually led people to think about like, oh, this is not the right way of living. In this rate, we would actually exhaust all our natural resources in a short duration of time. So all these things actually contributed to the thought of like a sustainable like thought in a sustainable direction. Even like the technological advances, which actually increased the that is like the way like the need of like more comfort parameters within the indoors, as in like the usage of like higher usage of HVAC, and all these things actually led to the higher consumption of energy as in electricity mostly. So current scenario, the built environment, the buildings is actually consuming about 50% of the overall energy produced. While we are taking the example of our country only, out of which about like one third of the overall energy consumption is being used by the the built environment. So the buildings are consuming most of the energy. Most of it, like about 75% of the energy, for the indoor comfort parameters, as in like the lighting and HVAC parameters. So all these things, like the need for being very comfortable indoors actually goes for a lot more energy consumption than usual. Mostly, most of this energy coming from non-renewable resources. People think that maybe we should switch to alternative energy resources to live in a more sustainable manner. So, the sustainable architecture, we can define the term sustainable architecture in various ways. So, one of which is like creating and responsibly sustaining healthy built environment by observing the demands of the ecology and optimizing the energy use without like over exploitation. Or another way of explaining it is like actually making use of the all the resources you require for your day-to-day living without like exhausting all these energy resources, so that the future generation have an opportunity to experiment with these energy and other resources just like you did. So it's actually like taking whatever you want from the like like the environment surrounding you, and you should actually leave something behind for the future generation to be able to experience all these factors just like you did. So this is like the concept of sustainability, not just in architecture as a whole. So when we're talking about the sustainable architecture, in when it comes to like the construction field or like the building construction, there are like a few things we actually do consider, or few things we should actually think about while we are designing a building, or like especially being someone in a construction field and who actually have like the power to actually do something about it. There are a few things we can actually consider. There are green rating systems that are in place to evaluate the green orientation of your construction. There are like green rating systems such as Griha under IGBC, Indian Green Building Council, and even LEED, which actually evaluate the green parameters you have taken into consideration while doing a development construction of a building. All these rating system actually evaluate the building construction in the very initial stage of plan, since the very initial stage of planning. That is like while designing the building, have which all parameters have you considered? Have you thought of like passive design strategies, or have like the way the while you are picking the site, have you placed where have you placed the site? Is it next to a public transportation hub, so that your occupants can actually rely on public transportation rather than like privately owned vehicles? Or even though did you go for a greenfield development or a greenfield development? So if the site was already being used, like, so, and you're actually constructing by demolishing an like previously existed building, you're uh, actually saving a lot of green land. So you're not really flattening any other site for your construction. So it actually adds more value to your building. Or even like the stop soil conservation on your site. So like there are parameters in place. Like if you're actually saving the top soil, say the first 2 feet of soil in the ground, you're saving it elsewhere during construction, and if you're reuse it for landscape purposes, the building. All these things, like all these factors, which actually happens in the very initial stage of you're designing, actually the procuring site and like the immediate state of construction actually gets counted. Or the like if you have like taken any parameters to reduce the energy consumption in the building, as in going for like passive conversion strategies, like the orientation of the building along the cardinal direction, so that the building actually consumes like absorbs less heat from the sun, or having like a proper placement of windows so that it actually enhances the air movement in the building, so that it reduces the HVAC load. So all these parameter matters. Or during the occupational time of the building, like the overall occupational energy load. Have you taken any parameters to reduce these factors? Going for like smart technologies to reduce the energy consumption, or like smart lighting systems, so that even if the occupant forgets to turn off the light, the energy it actually turns off on its own, so that you can actually cut short a lot on the energy consumption. Or factors such as like the rainwater consumption, rainwater harvesting, so that you can actually reduce the water demand of the building. So all these parameters get actually counted for this kind of green rating system, such as like Griha or LEED. So what happens is that having a green rating system, having like a platinum rated building, or having like a five-star building, actually kind of stands as like a way of branding. So it actually promotes people to build like a more greener buildings. So it's actually a certification program, but people actually get encouraged to go in a more sustainable direction during their construction. So these are a few parameters taken by the government. So when we are the thing is like the if you're going for a green building, it actually cost this kind of building costs a lot more than an ordinary building. So in certain cases, you can actually take a lot of other like a non-expensive sustainable aspect while you're designing a building. Like as an architect, if you are actually practicing in the field of architecture or construction, there are like a few things you can actually keep in mind during the construction, so that you can actually make your construction a lot more sustainable compared to the like other buildings. Like starting from the very landscape design, or the overall energy management of the building, going for like more energy efficient lighting or heating system in the building, going for a star rated air conditioning system, or other electronic infrastructure of the building actually helps you out in reducing the energy consumption of the building. Or even thinking of like the easiest things, such as like the stormwater management of the site, like thinking of like the topography of the site while designing, so that you can actually increase or don't really tamper a lot with the groundwater recharge of the site. All these things can actually be done without having like a lot of like financial investment on the project. So, like to count a few things you can actually do about it. First thing would be like the passive design strategies, such as like considering the cardinal direction, considering the solar path of the location when designing the building. Things such as like orienting the axis of the building in such a way that it doesn't really absorb a lot of sunlight during the day, as in like orienting the shorter side of the building towards like the south direction, so that only that wall absorbs a lot more heat during the day, or maybe arranging the bedroom spaces or the spaces for a resident spaces where people spend most of their time can actually be oriented in a direction where there is not a lot of solar exposure, in case of like Kerala or like the South India perspective. So all these things can be done. Even like the arranging the fenestration in such a way that fenestration, so the windows or doors in such a way that it doesn't really absorb a lot of heat, or it actually enhances the air movement in the indoors, so that you don't really have to rely a lot on the HVAC systems or artificial lighting systems, or having like proper sunshade, so that it actually filters the direct sunlight from coming inside, so you can actually cut short a lot on the heat absorption, yet you will get a lot of natural light in the building. So all this will actually count as like the passive design strategies. Or like one other thing would be like the active sustainable design, active parameters such as the electrical systems, plumbing systems, HVAC systems. We can choose all these devices we put in place in such a way that it actually have like smaller environmental footprint. For example, Okay, even though these kind of materials could actually have like a higher installation cost, like since you every building people will occupy for like about 30 or 50 years, so you in the long run it actually becomes more economic or more sustainable. These kind of devices can be used even in case of like having like in case of a toilet, if you have like a health faucet with like reduced pressure so that a lot like a big amount of water won't come out of this faucet, so that you can actually cut short on the water consumption building, or having systems in place such as like rainwater harvesting system, so that you can actually rely like a lot of your water demand will actually go from this rainwater harvesting system. You can actually, so you can actually reduce the groundwater consumption, or installing like filtration systems where you the gray water like from the kitchen or from the bathroom actually get filtered out, and if you are able to use it for gardening purposes, you can actually cut short a lot on the water demand of the building. So all these strategies can actually be implemented so that you can actually reduce a lot when it comes to like the active sustainable design parameters. Then one other thing is like relying on like renewable energy systems. Renewable energy systems, as in like wind energy or solar energy, can be harvested in a building instead of going for an electricity like relying on the government power supply or the public power supply. You can actually reduce, like you can actually generate a small amount of energy in your household. You can actually uh, use the energy and give the excess energy to the grid, so that nothing goes to waste, and you can actually reduce your electricity demand. And in the long run, you can actually reduce on the cost as well as the amount of like non-renewable energy you have been using can be cut short by a big factor. Like another parameters you can actually use is like the going for green building materials. This can be in different ways, as in like going for any kind of building material which has been like manufactured or pure or produced in like an environmental friendly method, as in like the materials such as like steel, lumber, all these things, they are actually like manufactured in like environmental friendly method and process. You can actually consider it as a green material, or you can actually go for like reused or refurbished material, as in like reusing the wood from like a previously like from like a demolished building. So you're actually increasing the lifespan of the material. So it would actually help a lot in cutting short on the material harvesting costs or the transportation costs, and even on the processing and purification of this kind of building, like as in purification or like processing of these building material as it is. So one is like going for green material which have been produced like green, like an environmental friendly method, or even reusing like or reusing materials, or like using refurbished materials. Actually helps with the like the carbon footprint of the building, and actually helps a lot in the um, environmental footprint of the building as it is. Another thing you can do is about the landscaping. So the landscaping, we know that in every building, the species of plants that are being used for the landscaping is almost the same, no matter which part of the world you are looking at, or which part of the country you're looking at. The kind of plants which have been used for the landscaping seems to be the same. Most of these plants being like not from the locality, or like the alien species plant, what we call. So what happens is that for these kind of plant, maintenance cost is a lot. As in not just about like the fertilization, even like the water demand for this building. The amount of water required for watering these plants is a lot more. These plants need a lot more care than the domestic species. So what one can do is, instead of going for any alien species of plant for the landscaping, you could actually try to use like native plant species. One benefit is that these kind of plants are actually compatible to the soil, so you won't need to put like a lot of care like by using these kind of plants for the gardening, or it actually reduces. You can actually cut out a lot in the water demand. You won't not have to for a lot like water this plant as often as like alien species. So So we can actually cut short on the overall landscaping water demand. Another thing one could do is like this is the stormwater management. Stormwater management, like if you're actually thinking about a barren land, a green field, what happens is about 80 or 90% of the rainwater that actually comes to this land gets percolated to the ground. So the and the groundwater reaches happen. So while you're actually going for a construction in such a site, what happens is a big part of the site would be covered with your building infrastructure. Not just the building, the surrounding paving, the landscaping, all these things take up the ground. So what happens is, since most of this material we use for construction, especially the ground cover we would use, doesn't really allow the groundwater seepage to happen. So the groundwater recharge wouldn't happen, or it will happen in a very less fraction when compared to what it used to be in the site before the construction. So what one could do is, we can actually design the building in such a way that you actually give justice to the topography of the site. Or you would actually can one could act, one what one could do is, you can actually consider the drain path, the pre-existing drain path of the site, and align your building in such a way that the groundwater recharge actually happens. Or you can actually consider the lowest lying point of the site and maybe make it into a water recharge point. Or actually going for like permeable material for the paving, or for the lands, for the paving, for the parking areas, for the road around the building, so that about like 50 or 60% of the water that is coming to the storm water coming to the site actually gets percolated, and it actually helps with the groundwater recharge. So these are the few things one could actually consider, and like anyone as who is in the field of construction could consider while designing an infrastructure or a building as it is, without like costing a lot. So as the green building practice as it is costs a lot more compared to an ordinary building. All these we consider all these like small factors while designing the building, or while treating the site before the construction, or even while choosing the building material, or using the right kind of like plastering for the wall, or the right color paint for the wall, or going for a non-reflective material for the wall. All these kind of small choices could actually help a lot when we are thinking about these practices in a sustainable direction. With that said, I would like to conclude my talk. Thank you.